morning, good morning, good morning. It is 5:30 in the morning on a Tuesday morning. We are recording. 5:30 in the morning on a Tuesday morning means it is time to pull a random object out of the Random Object Randomogrifier and get started with our daily sketches. I'm going to spritz these watercolors, make sure they're nice and juicy for later. I like them juicy and moist, so I don't have to scrub them. The toy out of the toy box, the random object out of the Random Object Randomogrifier. Today is an Inuit Hunter. Now, this is from Safari, and it is extremely detailed, and this is a Tuesday morning, so you're basically going to get essence of Inuit Hunter this morning. Because on Tuesdays, my day job requires that I go in just a little bit early. So I have to leave at exactly 6 o'clock. Or, face the consequences. So, I'm going to start with a little composition here. Make sure everything fits on the page where I want it to. Basically, just get the big shapes. Kind of looks like a Lego Inuit. The Safari toy calls itself an Eskimo, and Eskimo is really considered a derogatory term. It's considered a slur at this stage of the game. They prefer to be called by their tribal name. Inuit means the people, and it's used pretty much all across Canada and Greenland and the northern part of Alaska. Though there are different tribes, they're all pretty much related. There are different tribes, but they consider Eskimo to be a kind of a slur. So we're going to go with, even though the toy calls itself an Inuit Hunter, Eskimo, we're going to go with the more appropriate Inuit. Starting to fill in some details here because these details are anchors. Everything else depends on where these things land. So I want to make sure I get these in place before I start putting in all the major details. These folks are obviously very adept at surviving the cold weather. They're not just good at it, they prefer it. Their ancestors have been doing it for so long that they actually have more brown adipose tissue than their non-Inuit cousins. Brown adipose tissue is the brown fat that when it burns, it warms you up. It doesn't. It's considered the good fat. And their bodies are extremely good at storing and burning the good fat. Especially in infancy, not just even in infancy, especially in infancy, and that's what's interesting. Is especially in infancy because the ones who couldn't died, and so it's important. If you live in an area where it's sub-zero 9 months out of the year, you have to have some adaptations to survive the sub-zero climate. Historically, they subsisted mainly on a diet of fish and polar bear and seal and whale. And the blubber of these animals was a mainstay of their diet because it's high density calorie. It's a high calorie source of food, high density source of food that was easy to store and lightweight and would last them. They could dry it. They could ferment it. They had ways to store it because they would go all summer long, all spring and summer long, collecting it. And then in the winter, they would pretty much fast in the fall and in the winter. They would pretty much fast to preserve their stores. And so that was how they survived, and it was keto before the rest of us were going in and ordering bulletproof coffee lattes from Starbucks trying to be keto. These guys were living the keto life. But they were still kind of rounded because they needed that layer of warmth and protection. They needed that layer of fat to help them insulate against the cold weather. And so that is how the Inuit do. That's pretty good for essence of Inuit, I think. How are we doing on time? Ooh. Is the chat working? I can't tell if the chat's working. I just see me talking in the chat. I don't see anybody else talking in the chat. And my chat says it's disconnected, but that doesn't mean that it's disconnected. It could have been disconnected at 4 o'clock this morning and reconnected. So if anybody's in the chat, let me know. Just give me a shout out there. We can tell this is an Inuit because he has a rounded hood instead of a flat and peaked hood like the Yapuk would have. The Inuits are not the only tribe. There's the Aleuts, there's the Yapuk. And forgive me if I'm saying it wrong. I've never heard it said. I've only ever read it. The fact that his gloves are fingerless, Yapuk gloves have fingers, is a pretty good indication that this is in fact an Inuit hunter. And I initially listed it as an Inuit warrior, but there's not really such a thing as an Inuit warrior. The climate required a culture of cooperation. The cold climate and the lack of resources. There's no trees. There's no herds to follow. There's no caves to dwell in and fight over. You have woodlands in this, but your food's out on the ice. You have rocky shorelines, but again, your food's out on the ice. And so you don't know if the next tribe over is the one that's going to save your clansmen from falling through the ice. but they will because they depend on each other to survive. So there's a culture of cooperation that there wasn't in other indigenous peoples of North America, mainly because they're not chasing herds. They're not fighting over resources. They weren't chasing the food. They were waiting for the food. I mean, if you're just at an ice hole, waiting for the food to catch up to you, waiting for the food to come around, and somebody comes along and drills an ice hole next to you, you don't just look over and say, hey, get those ice holes out of here. Dun, 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 dun. I started with the wrong pen. Remind me next time that I'm supposed to go to this pen. I even have them in order of what pen I'm supposed to go to, but I went to the wrong pen first. Crazy. All right, let's erase that pencil. So yeah, they had they're using bone tools. They're using, because there's no wood, they're using bone tools. They're eating blubber and dried meat and fermented meat. Sharing the load because they're spread out thin. There's not a very large population. They're not crowded because nobody wants to live there. Nobody's fighting over that territory. You go to the Western Europe and you find your little patch that grows, a patch of ground that grows food, and everybody wants to fight over that. And people will get on boats and sail tens of thousands of miles to find an area where they can grow their own food without fighting for it. Nobody's fighting to be up in the frozen tundra. There's no stress to push east or west. There's no stress to fight over the land. There's no shortage of fish swimming up to your ice hole. You might tell everybody to move off so that they don't scare the fish out of your ice hole. But I had the question when I was doing my research, why weren't there more? Why didn't, if the Inuits and their ancestors came to the Americas about 1,000 years ago, about 1,200 years ago, about 1000 AD. And my question was, what if somebody from Eurasia came to the Americas in 1000 AD, why didn't the rest of Eurasia know about the Americas? How did we forget about the Americas? And it goes back to, nobody wanted to be there. It's cold there. So there was no competition. There was nobody that wanted to be there. So there was nobody pushing forward. And traveling across the ice to get from northern Japan and Eurasia to the Aleutian Islands or to Alaska or the Pacific Northwest, and they did. They showed up accidentally a bunch of times. And it was usually very tragic when they did. There's tales of finding ships full of dead people on the shoreline. Because it was only 1,000 years ago, so it's only 1,200 years ago, so there's written history of this. So they did come over, but nobody wanted to be there. It was cold. It was a dangerous trip. Lots of ice. And the Eurasian people on the eastern coast didn't have the deep water vessels. They only had the small fishing boats. They didn't have the deep water vessels like their Polynesian cousins or like the Europeans had. Can't talk, farting. Alright, I think shadow-wise that's probably pretty good. Let me get a shadow underneath that, and that'll give the top some time to dry so we can add some color. Like I said, essence of Inuit. Because I have to go to work today. A little earlier than I do most other days. Can't talk. Farting. Alright. That's probably close enough. See, and I like to look at that. I could be happy with that. I could be that right there and just be happy. Today, there's a push among the tribes to relearn their language, to make sure they're young, remember their cultures. Hang on, let me dry this real quick. I just had this one damp spot right here I didn't want to reawaken. Today, there's a push to make sure that the languages are not forgotten. There's a push, and this is true of all the indigenous people around the world. They've all decided that they don't want to lose their culture and their language to antiquity, as happened to you think about the Romans were global as far as they're concerned. They had the entire world conquered according to them, and the only people who speak Latin today are scholars. And we have to guess at what some of the pronunciations and some of the idioms are about. And the indigenous peoples of the world are trying to avoid that same fate. And so all around the world, and I'm down for it, all around the world there's a push to teach the languages of the indigenous people, so that the Inuit people, for instance, don't lose their language, don't lose their culture. They would sit in antiquity, they would sit and tell stories, because if you think about how are you going to entertain your clan during the 9 months of the year that it's dark? There's no sunlight because you're in the part of the world where the sun disappears under the horizon half the year, a full half the year. And so they have a tradition of long songs and stories, an oral tradition of sharing their history through long songs and stories. And they're reinvigorating that tradition and redoing the stories. That's too dark. That shouldn't have been that dark. Now I have to go back and darken some other things or lighten that back up. It'll dry lighter than it is, lighter than it looks. Dun, 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 dun. That red headband is not anything they would have worn. There's a red headband on there that they would never have worn. So but I think we're going to call that good. Let me dry that real quick and then we'll ink it. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're right on time. That's perfect. I'm sorry if you're in the chat. Apparently my chat is not working. Switch pen since I used the heavier pen before. I have to go to an even heavier pen to ink now so that we get some line weight. But you know, the Plains Indians, they had to fight over resources. You know, their herd would move on and they might run into another tribe following their herd, following the same herd. And that competition might mean no food. And so there was a lot of warring and competition. The Comanche and the Apache, for instance, they hated each other. Long before colonization and Europeans, they hated each other. And you just don't see that among the Arctic Circle people because there's a need for cooperation. And there's a lot to learn from that. There's a lot to offer. They have a lot to offer in that, and kind of, if you think about our future, kind of depends on it. If you look at our plans for the future, you hear people talk about colonizing the moon, colonizing Mars, and I know that's a bit far-fetched for some of you, but I want you to think about how high density protein and fat snacks would help out on the moon, how they would help out on Mars, how the spirit of cooperation would be imperative when you can't just leave. So the way they manage their food, the way they work together, all of that is important for us to learn from going forward. I'm not gonna lie, I even went down the rabbit hole of how come nobody has tried to make artificial whale blubber because of the high density. You would think the keto chicks around the world. Debbie, can you imagine Debbie at the coffee shop saying, I want a bulletproof coffee and give me some whale blubber? I can just see that happening. What is today? Today is the 1st. 01 July 2025. It'd have to be artificial whale blubber. You know, probably whale blubber flavored algae. All right. So that is my version of the Inuit. Let's see how it holds up to the photograph. Photo reference provided. And then let's see what's happened. Let's see how it holds up to. I'd turn that microphone off before I eject it. Camera. Let's see how it held up to what I was looking at. So essence of Inuit for the day. All right, so that's that. Let's see what the little girl 2 comes down and pulls the random object for the next day. So let's see what she pulled for us today. It is a bust of Kennedy. Ooh, I always go the wrong way. It's a bust of Kennedy, presidential bust. So tomorrow we're going to talk about President Kennedy. We may get into John Wilkes Booth. We may get into Lee Harvey Oswald. We may get into Lincoln. Who knows what we're going to talk about tomorrow. So that's what we're doing. If you're watching this at 5:30, before 5:30 in the morning on Wednesday, July 2nd, 2025, then you're watching the trailer, and this is what we're about to start doing. Stick around, we'll get right into it. But as of today, at the time of filming, it is Tuesday morning, and I have to get to work. So guys, thank you so much for joining me. You know I look forward to this every morning. This is how I maintain my accountability with my art buddies, and I hope you played along too. If you did, leave me a comment. Send me. We have a community page over on YouTube. You can post pictures. If you've been a subscriber, you can post pictures of what you drew. I'd love to see your version of the Inuit. So be sure and do that, and be sure and tune in tomorrow. Same Artistic Biker time, same Artistic Biker channel, and then we dance. And since my chat has not been working, I don't think anybody is going to be able to tell me that there's no dancing, that they can see me. So